All right, today we're talking about how middle market companies in today's economy can grow strategically. And my guest today has an amazing background. He spent 20 years learning directly under Jack Welch at GE and all the other leaders there. And I'll tell you more about him in a second. So just stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and every week we have interesting, smart founders and entrepreneurs and CEOs from all kinds of companies. And if you look at our archives, we've got Netflix and Grubhub and Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, Activation Blizzard, lots of great episodes for you. So check out the archives. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses to give to and connect with their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping companies to run their podcast and content marketing. We're the easy button for a company to launch and run their podcast. We do three things: strategy, accountability, and full execution, and even invented what some are calling the Wix of B2B podcasting, our platform, Podcast Copilot. So if you want to learn more about what we do, you can go to our website, rise25.com, or email us at support@rise25.com. All right. And my guest here today is Kevin Poole. He is the CEO of Newport LLC. It's a national business advisory firm based right here in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I'm based as well. Kevin brings over 3 decades of leadership experience across consulting, technology, and executive management. As I alluded to earlier, early in his career, he spent nearly 20 years at General Electric during the Jack Welch era, and he served in various senior operating roles, managed the $80 million unit. And he then joined Capgemini, which was formerly Ernst & Young Consulting, where he was a vice president there and managed about $100 million consulting practice in the Western U.S. He's also have a lot of experience and volunteer experience as well. And Kevin, I'm so delighted to have you here today. And I love to start with my guests, not with the impressive accolades and things they've accomplished during their career, but I like to go back a lot further before that. And you were a lifeguard at a country club, and you managed a team of lifeguards. How old were you doing this when you were doing this? And did this come naturally to you, or was that a skill that you had to learn on the job?
Well, I guess there's, kind of 2 parts to it. In terms of the being able to swim well and rescue people, that came to me naturally because I'd been a swimmer ever since I was 8 years old. But the fact that I was a supervisor of about a dozen other lifeguards, basically trying to manage unruly teenagers as a teenager myself, that took some learning, that took some doing. And I think I'll have to say that first leadership role I had at a very early age kind of got me interested in the concepts of leadership, managing others. And that's something that I've been interested in working on applying and improving on throughout my entire career.
You seem like a steady, even keel, good demeanor kind of person. Do you think someone saw that in you? Or is it like, Kevin, here, I can't deal with this half dozen lifeguards. Will you just take care of that problem for me? How did you end up in this position of managing other lifeguards at a young age?
Yeah, I think at the time I was reasonably responsible individual for a 16-year-old. I think the senior management at the country club that I worked at recognized that. I think the fact that I knew my craft just in terms of water rescue skills, I think was another positive thing. And the fact that I had good relationships with most of the folks that I was going to be supervising, I think all of those things led up to the club management deciding to appoint me as the supervisor.
Yeah. You also had this formative experience when you were growing up. Your family actually transferred to London, and you spent the first 3 years of high school in London. What was that experience like?
Well, that was phenomenal. I mean, it was a truly formative experience for me that's stuck with me my entire career. And I think more than anything, it kind of expanded my worldview living in another country. It helped me develop a sense of independence, a sense of confidence, because when I was a student there, I had an opportunity to travel quite a bit, either through school organized trips or during the summers. I would put together my own trips on my own. And when I think back on some of the trips I made at the time, I don't know that I would have let my own child make those trips. So for instance, one summer, the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. When I was all of 14 years old, I traveled by myself from London to Sweden, took the ferry across the North Sea, train
Wow.
across Sweden, and
Wow.
spent a summer living with some friends of the family, working at a company in Sweden for that summer. And then the
Wow.
following year, the summer between my sophomore and junior years, made a trip to New York, bought a 30-day Greyhound bus pass, and spent 30 days as a 15-year-old traveling across the U.S., visiting friends and family, navigating the bus routes by myself. And when I think
Were your
about
parents
what
like just kind of like laissez-faire about you? Like just like you just like this.
well, here again, I think I had demonstrated up to that point a sense of responsibility, a sense of maturity, that it was unlikely I was going to get into too much trouble, kind of knew how to take care of myself, had gone on, quite a few school-related trips, came back alive. So my folks felt, well, we'll maybe roll the dice a little bit. But the summer before, with the trip to Sweden, led them to believe that I was probably up for this 30-day trip by myself as a 14-year-old. And just kind of a quick funny story on that trip to Sweden, as I was trying to leave the country, an immigration officer stopped me. They saw this young child, 14 years old, traveling with a U.S. passport by himself. And I think he thought I was a runaway.
Mm.
So he pulled me out of the immigration line, called home to my mom, and said, Mrs. Poole, we have your son here. And he's claiming to be, planning on spending the summer living in Sweden with some friends. Is this true? And she said, yeah, it is true. Well, you let him go and stop bothering me. So the next summer, when I was traveling around the U.S. by myself, she actually wrote out a note for me to take with me that said, to whom it may concern, this is our son, Kevin, traveling with our permission around the U.S. If you need to call me to get verification, here's my number, but I'd rather you don't bother me.
And did you have to bust out the note anywhere?
I only on one occasion. I was getting on a Greyhound bus, I think, going from Chicago to Salt Lake City, and the bus driver was looking at me a little suspect. So between the passport and the note, he let me on.
So there's definitely something about you that leads people to give you responsibility and allow you to manage your own affairs, I guess. Um, from the stories you've told so far. And you go and you get your MBA from Columbia, and then you end up going to GE, and you work under Jack Welch, who is just this iconic business leader. Um, Tell me what that experience was like from start to finish. Like, what was the first, iteration of it, going to work there?
Yeah. So you're right. This was GE back during the Jack Welch era, when GE was still a component of the Dow. It's sad to see kind of what's happened to the company since then. But during the 20 years I was there, it was kind of the cat's meow when it came to business leadership and recognition for all the great tools, techniques, best practices that GE developed. And I had the benefit of learning those things during that time when Jack Welch was leading the organization. I had the opportunity to meet him on multiple occasions, present to him on multiple occasions. And what I would say is, as long as you had your facts straight, you had done your homework, you weren't trying to BS them, you were fine. But I did see instances where folks hadn't done their homework or were trying to BS them, and that didn't end so
All
well.
right, I got to hear these stories. So, is there one that you remember in particular where someone came in and tried to wing it and ended up getting grilled by him?
Yeah, there was one where there was a group of regional managers. This was, I think, at a Chicago-related event, and there were a group of GE managers presenting to him from their various business units. And one of the managers came in and was just clearly tried to wing it. And it was only, two or three questions in when Jack decided that he really didn't have the time of day to listen to that poorly prepared individual. So basically, sent him home packing from the event right there in front of his peers.
Fired or just like go home?
Well, just go home and, go back and do your homework and, come see me again when you have your facts straight.
Man, that must have been a wake-up call for that person.
Well, it kind of sent a signal to the rest of the managers presenting to him. And fortunately, I had already presented prior to that individual, so I did not have to kind of worry about my presentation, after having seen that.
What do you think of that as a management strategy?
Well, it certainly got folks' attention. And what I would say is that during that era, that was probably the approach that a lot of organizations adopted, right? Kind of top down, command and control, Not sure it would work entirely today. But I think, there was something to be said for setting a high bar, expecting people to be prepared, expecting people to have their facts straight. I know, one thing that I learned from my days at GE was that Welch expected all of the new leaders in the organization to be spending about 50% of their time on personnel and employee-related matters. So attracting, retaining, developing, and letting go when necessary, individuals in their organization. So I think more than anything else, what I learned during my 20 years at GE was really kind of building on that initial leadership experience I had working as a lifeguard when I was all of 16 years old, and developing that in a more professional setting, and really learning the dark arts of leadership during that time at GE. And that, I think, has served me well during my time at EY, Capgemini, and more recently during my time at Newport. And certainly in working with the clients that I work with in helping them grow and develop their own leadership teams.
So, other than spending 50% of your time as a leader within GE on people matters, what are some other examples where, you've said that you saw what good looks like at GE, really good practices? What are some other examples where you saw what a really good, well-managed company was like? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. I think the other concept that I learned during my GE days was the notion of operating discipline. The ability to lay out a plan, whether it's a multi-year strategic plan or a shorter-term operating plan, and then to develop the details around that plan, rally your organization around that vision, and then execute that plan with discipline, whether that's weekly reviews, monthly reviews, what have you, detailed project plans, the ability to stick with the plan, and execute that plan as developed, of course, making mid-course corrections as necessary, but just that whole notion of operating discipline and using appropriate tools around that, whether it might be Six Sigma or some of the other tools like Workout that GE was known for, back during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s.
Yeah. And any other anecdotes around being around Jack Welch?
What I would say is that he was an incredibly charismatic individual. He had the ability to really kind of light up a room through his charisma. He had an ability to engage with people on a personal level. He had the ability to engage with people on a one-to-many level. So one of the things that I've tried to focus on as a leader in terms of developing my own skills and in coaching people who've worked for me or clients that I've worked with is to really try and develop their communication skills and communication style in a way that works both one-to-one, one-to-many, but most importantly is authentic and comfortable for them. Because if you try and do something that's not comfortable, it's going to come across as inauthentic.
If you try to be Jack Welch,
Exactly.
and you don't have his natural charisma, then it's going to come out kind of awkward.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. What an amazing opportunity. So you go on from there to Capgemini, where you're running the equivalent of what would be a large company, $100 million consulting practice. I'm a bit fascinated by consulting of that size. So talk a little bit about why you decided to make that switch after 20 years at GE.
Yeah, so great question. When I was at GE, that was still a point in time where companies tended to move people around a lot, both between divisions and geographically. And my wife and I were kind of settled out here in the Bay Area. We had a young family, and the thought of moving again just wasn't that exciting. And GE at the time was very much a kind of a Midwest, East Coast company. Not a lot of upward opportunities at GE here on the West Coast. And that's where I started kind of looking around for what's next. And I hit on consulting as a field where, as long as you live close to an airport, you could have lots of opportunities within an organization. Knew I wanted to go someplace big. And that's why I made the switch into Big Five consulting at Ernst & Young. Very, very different field in that in consulting, you're working with lots of different situations, lots of different clients. I found that really exciting. You learn a lot because you go through a lot of cycles. You see a lot of different businesses. You see a lot of different industries. You learn how to spot patterns. You learn how to connect dots. You learn how to come up to speed quickly on different clients' situations. You learn how to be a good analyst, good critical thinker. So there were additional sets of skills that I developed during my dozen years at Big Five Consulting that I could kind of layer onto my core leadership and management abilities that I developed during my GE days. And it was just a fascinating experience for me, seeing all those different client situations, working with large companies. I had a bit of a specialty in technology, so I did a lot of work with Microsoft, HP, Dell, Cisco. So getting to see what these other large, well-run companies look like, and getting a chance to kind of help them improve on their capabilities was just a fascinating experience.
Yeah. Was that challenging to have a young family and to, work in a demanding role like that?
It was. I have to say I missed more of the first 12 years of our daughter's life than I would ever care to admit. I kind of got used to the physical toll of the travel, but being away from my family was tough. Fortunately, my wife's job at the time had a bit of flexibility, so we were able to manage things schedule wise. We had a phenomenal nanny too that kind of helped everything, hold everything together. But in the end, it really was kind of the travel that you were alluding to that caused me, after a dozen years at EY and Capgemini and Big Five Consulting, kind of start fishing around for what's next.
Yeah.
And that's when I ended up leaving that Big Five Consulting world.
So you joined Newport, which at the time had only been around for a year or so. So you go from running this $100 million division, which if it was its own company would be massive, to joining what's kind of a startup. So talk a little bit about that decision.
Yeah, so that move was kind of intentional. I like to say up to the time I joined Newport, I'd never worked for or advised a company with fewer than 50,000 employees, and that's kind of literally true.
And how many employees did Newport have at the time?
At the time, I think Newport had about a dozen.
Okay, so a bit of a shift.
Yeah, and our typical client might have 50 or 100 employees.
Oh, so a massive change.
Yeah, massive change. But I know I wanted something different. And I also really like the appeal of working for privately held, founder-led, founder-owned companies. And my hunch coming into Newport, my hypothesis coming in, was that the work we do would have a much more personal feel to it than what I was doing advising the Ciscos or the Dells of the world, that we could make a difference more quickly because you're only working through, one or two layers of management at most, as opposed to 10 or 12 layers of management, and would have just a much more personal feel to it because you're impacting, not just the life of the owner, but the family of the owner, their long-term financial prospects, what have you. And I'll have to say that hunch of mine, that hypothesis of mine, has absolutely been proven out. And the 13 years I've been at Newport, absolutely zero buyer's remorse. The fun that we have with our clients, the difference that we make in their lives, in their family's life, the difference that we make for their employees and their companies has just been so rewarding for me because it's a different type of value that we're bringing to our clients. We're basically taking what I've learned and what the other 40 partners at Newport had learned working for these big companies we worked with early in our careers, our ability to know what good looks like. And we're taking that knowledge, we're downsizing it and making it fit for these small privately held businesses. And we're using that to help these entrepreneurs scale their businesses and make them more valuable, and in some cases, get them ready for sale. And it's just, again, so rewarding to me to be able to do that for these business owners who are thirsting for the kinds of help that we're able to bring them.
Did you find, at least in the early years, that it required a big adjustment on your part? It's not easy to tell, a small company, well, just do it like GE did it, I mean, it's like, well, we don't have those resources. How did you adjust in terms of kind of the world you'd known to this new world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the biggest adjustment was this, because you would think it's different size companies, it's different tools, techniques, what have you. But for me really, and for the partners who joined Newport, who spent the bulk of their careers selling to professional managers at large companies, when you're selling to a professional manager at a large company, you're making rational arguments around net present value and those types of things, selling to the brain of that professional manager. Now, when you're selling to a business owner who's probably pretty mercurial, perhaps somewhat undisciplined, very emotion driven, you're not selling to their brain so much as you're selling to their heart, and you're connecting with them on an emotional basis. So for me and the others who've joined Newport, really the biggest change is in how we communicate with these business owners, how we sell to them, how we support them. It's that they tend to think differently and operate differently than professional managers, if you will, and learning how to work with these kind of mercurial, sometimes undisciplined or less than focused managers took a little bit of time to learn. But once you've mastered, kind of the difference between advising a professional manager versus advising an entrepreneurial business owner, it's an awful lot of fun. It really is. But you're right. There is an adjustment period. And fortunately,
Yeah.
we've recognized that. And now the onboarding program we have for partners who join Newport incorporates all of those learnings that the early Newport partners gleaned the hard way.
So I want to ask about the hiring process. So you mentioned that we have a training process once people join, but for you, for hiring, whether it's new, I don't know if you call them associates or consultants, or even recruiting partners to come in, how do you figure out whether someone who, like you, has spent maybe 10, 20 years working in big consulting, they're coming to work for Newport? How do you figure out whether they will thrive or not, whether they'll be able to make that adjustment and speak to the heart, as you said?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one that frankly we're still kind of fine tuning
Still
our
in the
process
journey.
around. Yeah,
Yeah.
but we're certainly a lot better at it today than we were 14 years ago when we first launched. And I think we're pretty well dialed into our ideal candidate profile in terms of the experience set that we look for. So we look for people who have that kind of hybrid background like I do, meaning they have meaningful senior executive roles in operating companies. And then they've also had substantial consulting experience, either on their own or at a regional consulting firm or at a big five type of situation. So they come in already knowing how to run a business. They come in knowing the dark arts of consulting. And then what we need to do then is kind of school them up on that last mile of making sure that they're able to connect with a business owner on an emotional level. So what we do there is we really probe really hard for the emotional intelligence or the EQ, if you will, of that partner candidate. And the way that we get at that is by having them tell lots of stories about their background, and whether it's the client work that they've done or personal stories that they want to share. And then we have them talk to a number of partners at Newport. And I should say at Newport, it's a bit of a different animal in that we only have partner level individuals. We have no junior staff. We have no junior consultants. So when we do work for a client, the only person they see is the partner who actually sold them the work or other partners that they might bring in. So we spend a fair amount of time deliberately trying to get to know that partner candidate and try and get a sense of how flexible they are, how adaptable they are, what's their tolerance for ambiguity, what's their tolerance for setbacks, because working with a mercurial business owner can be a little frustrating sometimes. And we try and get into the mind of that partner candidate and just try and assess their flexibility, their adaptability. Can they operate in an environment where we don't have lots of staff around to support our partners in the organization? Can they, travel light, as I'd like to say? Can they do their own slide decks, right? Can they produce their own Word documents? So those are some of the things that we probe for, in addition to just the the business knowledge of how to run a business and to the kind of core consulting skills that someone might have learned at a traditional consulting firm.
Tell me about this trucking company. You had a client that you worked with, 30-year-old trucking company, husband and wife had run it and scaled it up. And then their challenge was they wanted the next generation to take it over. And Newport came in and helped them. Talk about that.
Yeah. So this particular one, it's a classic Newport client. You have a business owner that's scaled the business from 25 to 50 million or 50 to 100 million, and they want to take it to the next level. And they haven't done that before. No one on the leadership team has done that before. And we're able to come in with the experience set of our Newport partners and help them do that in a more predictable and profitable fashion than they might otherwise do it on their own. And the way that we do that is what I like to say is we leverage the collective scar tissue that the Newport partners have accumulated over the course of their career to help that owner scale the business in a way that they accumulate less scar tissue on their own and sleep better at night because of that experience and the knowledge that we bring to the table. And oftentimes when we're helping our clients scale their business, it's either to perhaps get it transaction ready and prepared for a sale, or in this particular case, as is sometimes the case, we're helping prepare a business to hand off in Gen 2. So in that scenario with this particular client, a trucking company, we're both preparing the business for a transition. By that, I mean trying to make it as easy to operate as possible, because when Gen 2 takes over a business, they're usually taking it over with maybe 10 or 15 years of experience versus the 30 to 40 years of experience in operating the business Gen 1 has had. So you want to make the business as easy to operate as possible. So you're kind of coaching up the business itself, professionalizing the business, improving the processes, getting it ready for that handoff. And at the same time, you're getting Gen 2 ready to take over the business. So helping them develop their skills, particularly in areas that they might not be fully proficient. In this particular client situation, they had two sons that were taking over, both of whom were extremely capable individuals who got along real well, which isn't always the case, I've found in family business situations.
Sure.
And also they had the benefit of having very complementary skills. So together they really form kind of a full, I'll call it CEO unit, and that they bring the sales skills, the operating skills, the financial acumen, the HR acumen to the table. So the two of them together really represent a complete package. And we're about 4 years into this client relationship where we've managed to help the client grow the top line by 50%, the bottom line by 3x, more than double the value of the business. And it's a situation where Gen 2 has largely taken over the day-to-day operations of the business and is really set up for success. And because of that, the husband and wife who founded the business are able to start stepping back from the business in a way that they can do so safely and sleep well at night as they start to enjoy the very kind of comfortable retirement that they so well deserve.
I had an interesting conversation earlier this morning with another guest about parenting the next generation and how you teach them some of the skills that you learn as a business owner, business founder. I'm curious, you mentioned that these sons are doing a great job. What do you think it is that led? Is it because they worked in the company for, you said 10 or 15 years? Is it was it something that the parents did to groom them from a young age? Do you think that they just happen, maybe some of these genes, traits that led the parents to be entrepreneurial were passed down? Is there anything you can point to that was a reason why they were poised to take over the company and are doing a good job of it?
Yeah, so I'd say it's a few things. Number one, the parents did a great job of raising sons with just wonderful values. Right, just the integrity, the intellectual honesty, the professionalism, the respect, the empathy, all of those things that you look for in a human being, they're all there. So that's point one. Point two, they've worked in the business for a while, one longer than the other, but they're just very capable individuals, and I think they've inherited some good genes from their parents in that sense. And then the last thing I'd say is that it can be hard sometimes, and I know this as a parent, it can be hard sometimes getting your kid to listen to something that you have to say, but they'll oftentimes be much more open to hearing it from someone else.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we may come into a situation where we're asked to help groom Gen 2, and Gen 1 knows exactly what the development needs are in Gen 2, and they'll know exactly what advice they need to be given. It's just that Gen 2 doesn't want to hear it from their parents.
Yeah.
So we're able to come in as that kind of neutral, objective third party, deliver in some cases the exact same advice their parents would give them.
Yeah.
But Gen 2 is much more receptive to hearing it because it's not coming from their parents.
Yeah. That's great. And I'm curious, have there ever been a situation where it came to you where a company wanted you to groom the next generation and you had to have a tough conversation with Gen 1 to say that I'm not sure that this is the right fit for this company? And how do you make that determination? Maybe it's just a diamond in the rough and we need to polish this diamond versus this isn't going to work.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we're brought into a client situation and they're kind of specifically decided that they'd like to see Gen 2 take over, we'll do an initial assessment of the capabilities of Gen 2. But no matter how strong we think they might be, we always tell the client that, it's probably 50-50 whether Gen 2 is going to be capable of taking over. And for that reason, we're going to do two things. We're for sure going to groom Gen 2 to take over, but at the same time, we're going to undertake a series of actions in the business to make it more valuable, make it easier to run, make it transaction ready, so that we've got both a plan A and a plan B. So plan A may be Gen 2 taking over, and if they're capable of stepping up and doing that, that's wonderful. But if they're not capable of doing that, then we're well positioned for plan B, which might be selling the business. Now, getting back to your specific question about, giving that, kind of sobering talk or that straight talk. There certainly have been situations where we've had to communicate to Gen 1 either very early on in the client engagement or halfway through or towards the end, where, our considered judgment is that Gen 2 is not capable of taking over. But what I found is that more often than not, if we've worked with a family for a year, 2 years, and the owners, Gen 1, have been able to see the performance or lack thereof of the Gen 2, they're usually seeing and thinking and feeling the same thing that the Newport advisors thinking and feeling and seeing. So it's unusual that it's a surprise one way or the other. So it's unusual that we'll come in and we'll say, hey, we think Gen 2 is fully ready to take over, when Gen 1's saying, no, I don't think that's the case. And it's also unusual that the Gen 1 saying, Gen 2 is fully ready to take over and we're having to counsel it's not. I mean, we're kind of seeing the same signals over that year or two that we're working with them that the parents are seeing. And as a result, we usually have a fairly aligned view of the situation.
Yeah. By the way, that was a very confusing multi-part question. I apologize. You did a great job of handling it. I usually try not to do that. So I'll ask a simple one. Why no associates? That's an unusual model. It seems to me like that would, maybe limit you from certain types of engagements. So was that a deliberate decision that was made at some point?
Yeah, that was a deliberate decision made at the time the company was founded. And I will say it is one that we've re-examined at various points over the last 14 years. And every time we've looked at the question, which we'll have to admit is maybe every 5 years, by that I mean myself, the leadership team, and all the other 40 partners in the organization, always come up with the same answer, which is a resounding, let's keep it how it is. And the reason that we like to do that is that when we get to work with our clients one-on-one, and the way that we work with them is different than a traditional consulting firm. So a traditional consulting firm is going to come in and do what I would refer to as project-based work. So they'll come in and they'll sell a 4-month engagement to come in and maybe improve the receivables in an organization or make some enhancements to the supply chain. So they'll come in, they'll give a bid, fixed price bid for a project. We'll sell the project. The bulk of the work is done by the junior staff, the partner who sells the engagements, checking in here and there. But the knowledge that's being delivered in that situation is based on the knowledge of relatively junior, sometimes, kind of mid-level people. And the value that they're able to deliver kind of plays out over an extended period of time because they're bringing value from a relatively limited experience base. And we decided that we wanted to kind of change up that model at Newport. And instead of coming in and doing project-based work, we come in as kind of a peer advisor or really a peer mentor, where we'll help the business owner craft a multi-year growth plan in the first couple of months we're working with them. And then we'll sit side by side with them. We might come in for 3 or 4 hours on one afternoon or maybe a couple afternoons a week, helping them execute that plan as an advisor, as a mentor, as kind of an accountability coach, coaching them, coaching their leadership team, helping them execute on upgrades to their leadership team, helping them implement plans that we've developed through their staff. And we've just found that the partners that we attract to Newport enjoy that doing that type of work. And also, the thing I'd say is that the 40 partners at Newport, we've spent 30, 40 years leading teams of people. And can be a lot of fun and a lot of benefit leading teams of people. But also there's some responsibilities that come along with leading teams of junior staff.
There's some freedom of not having to do that anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the ability to come in and provide, gray-haired advice, or in cases like mine, kind of no-haired advice to a business owner based on 30 to 40 years of real-world experience, we're able to come in and add value nearly instantly, even if we don't know what their business looks like, and we don't know the details of their industry. We know what good looks like. We know what business 101 looks like, where they oftentimes don't know that. So we can add value literally from that very first meeting after kicking off an engagement with a client.
You sit at a unique position, and so I want to ask you about two things, and then we'll wrap it up. The two things are, number one is a lot of people talk about like a coming wave of business transferring, one generation wanting to retire and go off into the sunset and transfer along the businesses. Do you notice that on a day-to-day level or even year-to-year level? Any comment, any observations around that? Boy,
that's absolutely true, John. There's just a huge intergenerational transfer of wealth. Now, in a lot of families, that's just a stock portfolio being transferred from one generation to the next. But in generations where there's a family business involved, right, then there's a more complex set of calculus you go through to figure out, right, is Gen 2 even interested in remaining in the business? Do we think that they're capable? If they are capable, what time horizon are they capable of stepping up in? Is that time horizon consistent with my time horizon and wanting to step back from my business? So there's a whole set of decisions and discussions that need to be had to carefully orchestrate and facilitate that succession planning is kind of what you're referring to.
Yeah.
To successfully move a business from Gen 1 to Gen 2. And what I'll say is, the odds of a business making it to Gen 2 or Gen 3 or Gen 4, which is the case for some of our clients, unfortunately, the deck's stacked against them. If you look at the statistics, not a lot of businesses make it to Gen 2, even fewer to Gen 3 or Gen 4. And the smart ones are kind of reaching out for help and assistance in figuring out how to make that work.
Yeah. And then the last piece was everyone's talking about AI. Are you observing that? Is that having an impact across your client base now?
Yeah, it absolutely is, both in terms of how we deliver work for our clients and how we're encouraging them to get work done for themselves. So literally, I might be in the middle of a meeting with a client and a question will come up, and we'll just pull up ChatGPT or Perplexity or any of the other AI tools and put a question to it and get a response back, kind of a thoughtful response to help facilitate a discussion that we might be having. So it's a productivity tool for us at Newport as advisors. And when we use a tool like that. We're always very transparent with our clients that we're using a tool. And then we're encouraging them to use these tools themselves in their own work. So for instance, I have a client that was going to be hiring their first outside salesperson. So I said, to their person running HR, we're like, well, let's develop a position spec for an outside salesperson. And since it was their first outside salesperson, they really had no other position spec to draft off of. So we said, well, let's put ChatGPT to work and say, let's draft a position spec for an outside salesperson in this particular industry with this set of responsibilities. And 30 seconds later, we had a 95% complete draft. So there's absolutely uses for AI, even in mid-sized companies, for internal productivity and in client-facing situations.
Well, Kevin, this has been great. Really appreciate your time here. And where can people go to learn more about you, learn more about Newport, and soon to be launching Newport podcast?
Yeah, so just come to the Newport website, newportllc.com. And you'll be able to see a number of case studies, understand the background of our partners, hear from some client experiences, understand the offerings that we have for our clients, whether it's the value creation work that we do for them or the sell side M&A work that we do for them.
Excellent. Kevin, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, John. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.